Welcome to the channel about news from around the world. While you subscribe and like it, we're going to start.
The White House press service made two interesting, at first glance unrelated, statements the other day. Iran not only supplies Russia with UAVs, but also actively helps set up their own production. The PRC has a spy base in Cuba. The message of Joseph Biden's administration is clear: American foes unite in alliances, which cannot go unanswered. Unlike some, Washington is not in the habit of throwing words to the wind. Capitol Hill figures fear that both of these factors will combine to form a new axis of authoritarian regimes. This, you see, would infringe upon U.S. interests from East Asia to the Antilles, and from Northeast Europe to the Strait of Hormuz. Partnership actions of the above-mentioned countries are considered by transatlantic hawks as nothing less than a march against democracy. Thus, another play about the global struggle between freedom and tyranny is launched. However, there are some distinctive nuances that the New York Times decided to speculate about. Not long ago, both Iran and Cuba were seeking friendship with powerful Uncle Sam. Now they are oriented towards China and Russia, as in the era of victorious socialism. This has happened because the Americans are unwilling to fall prey to the export of revolutions, ranging from communist to Islamic. As a result, Tehran and Havana had no choice but to fall into the arms of Beijing and Moscow. Thus Trump and Biden had a hand in the creation of the current anti-American cooperation that is taking shape in a kind of bloc. The political system of the Republic of Cuba, with its population of 12 million, remains closed, but the economy is a Klondike for foreign investment, provided that the post-Castro regime does not crack down on the newly minted oligarchs. That oligarchy will emerge here in the context of initial capital accumulation is beyond doubt. Yes, relations with Washington have improved under President Obama, but the Biden-Trump administration has not only deprived Cuba of a major source of tourism and trade, but also scared away European business. It turned out the way it did. On the 20th of July 2015, Barack Obama announced the revival of diplomatic relations between Cuba and the US, and tensions were diffused in a sense. But under the eccentric Donald Trump, counterintuitive sanctions were imposed in June 2019. Cruise ships were banned from entering Cuban ports and private and corporate flights to the Liberty Island were cancelled. But most importantly, trade has come to a virtual halt. As a result, under Trump Cuba hater, Havana had to tighten its belt, though it survived the unpleasantness for better or worse, all the more so that Jose Marti heirs did not get used to it. China, on the contrary, met halfway, restructuring Cuba's national debt and forgiving it $100 million. In return, it agreed to host a Chinese electronic surveillance base on its territory, 160 kilometers from Florida. U.S. Iranian relations are a separate topic that goes back, if not centuries, then decades. Iran does not like its current status as a rogue state, but the collective West has de facto branded the Persians with it. Probably not coincidentally, the Bush-era administration understood that taming Iran meant keeping it on a short leash. If not tamed, Khomeini's legacy must be eradicated as best it can. But the modern American fathers of the nation apparently got paw marks in history, and are not in the habit of repeating what they've learned. But under President Hassan Rouhani, Washington had a real chance to make Tehran its puppet. All that was needed was a consistent, unhurried handling of the Iranian nuclear issue. In the 1940s, Ho Chi Minh's struggle for Vietnam's independence from France sought the protection and support of the United States, which is hardly surprising, because the Vietnamese rebels were fully cooperating with the forerunner of the CIA, the US Office of Strategic Services, in the fight against Japan. President Truman then treacherously ditched his Asian allies in solidarity with Paris, i.e., with the then French President, Jules Vincent Auriol. And by 1950, the Vietnamese patriots were already receiving arms from the USSR through the PRC. In the end, US hypocrisy turned into a long-term tragedy, not only for Vietnam but also for the whole of Indochina. A decade later, the United States virtually missed out on Cuba. After coming to power in 1959, Fidel Castro understandably began bargaining with Washington. A revolutionary by nature, but a sensible leader, Fidel was unwilling to aggravate for the sake of aggravation. An equal dialogue, alas, did not work, and after the total nationalization of the sugar industry prompted Eisenhower to react, Havana had to ask for protection from the Kremlin. Countries with the same polity do not necessarily remain allies. This does not mean that they become enemies. All sorts of things happen, though. At one time the Americans succeeded in splitting the Socialist Balkans, where Joseph Broz Tito distanced himself from Joseph Stalin, and later Yugoslavia went along with the US and NATO. For this it subsequently had to pay a heavy price. In the 60s, seemingly eternal friends China and the USSR became bitter enemies. The moral of the whole story is that the Anglo-Saxons are looking for a convenient excuse to destroy vestiges of anti-democratic statehood in any part of the world. According to their concepts, there is nothing ideologically predetermined in strengthening security or military cooperation between Havana, Beijing, Tehran and Moscow. That means there is a chance for color revolutions there with a successful outcome. What will matter in the near future is where the Arab oil East and Africa will swing. It will determine who stays friends with whom, how effective Western sanctions are, and who ends up as the mortal enemy of the US. It may be worth reminding America and partly Europe, given how many they have used and screwed over at different times, hardly anyone is willing to deal with them willingly. Well, except for Ukraine.
Thank you for watching. If you're interested, subscribe and leave a comment.